Welcome back to Inspector Toolbelt Talk. Today we have on Jon Bolton. How are you, Jon?
Awesome, man. Awesome. Thanks so much for having me. And I love this stuff. So thank you. Really appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you for being on. We actually asked you to be on because I was reading one of your posts on one of the Facebook groups. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself so we know where you're coming from and why you have such a strong opinion on our subject today, which is the consolidation of the home inspection industry. So tell me a
Ooh.
little bit. Yeah, I know. Ooh. Tell me a little bit about your background.
It's not real exciting, to be honest with you. It's kind of humorous, but I went to school, I got a degree, I got a job, I got laid off in about a year. So I was only employed for 1 year for the for from that point up until just a few months ago. So I've been self-employed over 30 years. All right.
Nice.
Right. So I like me for one understands and gets the entrepreneur. Like I was forced into it. Mama bird kicking the baby out of the nest.
Mhm.
I didn't have mom and dad anymore. It was up to me if I wanted to eat. Right. So I did all kinds of stuff. And one day my dad says, you got to look into home inspections. And I'm like, man, I'm tired of that construction stuff. My job out of school was a superintendent, and that was like everything's your fault, get it done yesterday, and you're over budget, and it's the same thing. It was high stress, move, and my dad finally talked me into doing it. And back in the day we had these books, these real thick books, and they had a lot of yellow pages and a lot of white pages. You know what I'm talking about?
I've seen them in history books. Yeah.
You see, okay.
I used to sit on one, I think.
Yeah, so I opened up the yellow pages, and there were 2 pages of home inspectors. That's it, two. Like, right? I could see all of them there. So you remember the number one marketing strategy of a business back in those days was the alphabet. That was the
Hmm.
number one marketing strategy, right? So I started at the top, and it said AAA, All American Home Inspections. And I called. And the guy says, "Yeah, I can use somebody. Come on in." And that was really the beginning. So that was 1998 when I started doing that.
So
And
that means you've been in the home inspection industry for boy, my math is bad. 25 years.
yeah, 25 years.
Wow. And then you're a commercial inspector, and you also own a home inspection school down there in sunny Florida, right?
Correct, correct, correct.
Man, that's
We
awesome.
I used to be an instructor for another school, HIA, and the owner was looking to get out of the business and to sell it to move on. I couldn't afford to purchase it at the time, but I thought, well, hey, I've been doing that for them at that point for 8 years, give or take, something like that. And thought, well, it'd be a great time to move the school into Central Florida. We're in the Orlando area, so it's very easy for people to get to us. I thought, hey, this is a perfect time. Let's move it to Central Florida, start our own thing. And we started doing the pre licensure class. And in Florida, you're required to have a 120-hour pre licensure class, a state, no choice, right?
Hmm.
So we started doing that. And, I went from going to this school where I only had to work it was 3 or 4 days in that time period, just doing limited subjects, to working every single day, all day long, because you got to cram 120 hours in 2 weeks. I mean, so it's move, and that was tough. It took a lot of the fun. I'll tell you that. It took a lot of the fun away, but that's where we started anyway. Evolved out of that.
So I guess that sets the stage for the fact that you've been in the industry for a long time, since well before licensing in most states.
Oh,
You've
sure.
been in the industry longer than me. I'm coming up on 20 years, and you've well past that. But you've seen it from a lot of different angles: home inspector, commercial inspector, school owner, teaching other home inspectors. So I think you're probably one of the most well versed inspectors to talk about the consolidation of our industry. Because me personally, even just 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, the industry looked completely different than it does now. I don't even recognize it, let alone almost 20 years ago when I first got in. It was a completely different industry. And we always hear the older inspectors talk about that. They're like, back in my day, it's like, okay, it was different. I mean, you can just look at the metrics, you can look at how the industry worked, and it was just different. Would you
Yeah.
say that is different now?
Oh my gosh. You know, I believe I heard you talk about it on one of your shows. Great podcast, by the way.
Thank
I've,
you.
I've watched several of them, so it's impressive. And as you know, we never, ever, ever stop learning.
Hmm.
So whether it's a younger guy or an older guy, there's always something to take in. And I believe you guys were talking about um, about the old days and how things were. And I'm thinking, yeah, back when we were using that hammer and chisel to write that report, it was tough, and the tablets were really heavy and stuff. I was actually going off on a point now, and I lost my train
No,
of
that's
thought.
okay. You were the first one to use a tablet out in the field, except it was a stone tablet. No, I remember being the first one in my area to do electronic reports, and everybody's like, "Whoa!" And I had this like I forget what they call them, the Palm Pilots, with
Right.
they're like the old personal computer things. Everybody thought I was so cool and trendy. It was so dorky, but I think one of the biggest changes, besides the technology and what we offer and how we offer it, is basically how our industry is viewed. It's starting to be viewed, in a lot of people's opinion, as a commodity. And whenever you commoditize, is that a word?
Yeah.
Commoditize anything, it it changes it. It it cheapens it in a lot of ways. But that's what happens with consolidation. Um, so your post on Facebook was basically a video of. Can you explain what was happening with that post that you put out there?
Well, it was just a clip from a video. It was put out by Robin Cat Lemoyne, and I wanted to just bring up to guys and gals out there, let's have a conversation. Okay, and this is just what they were doing in the video, is having a conversation going, this is where we're at, this is why we did things, this is where we're going. And it was just exploratory, explanatory in nature. And I thought, well, we can sit here and talk about it now or discover it later when it's crept up on you. So why
Hmm.
not have a conversation? And like to your point earlier, it's not so much that I have my opinion. I'm very wide open at this point. Especially the older you get, like I am now, I don't need certain things. I don't need the trophies anymore. I don't need a lot of that stuff. I like having the conversation, and I like learning because things are developing really fast. And I am that guy that I need help figuring out how to, you know, do password stuff on my phone, right? I understand technology is passing me by. And so I'm trying to have these conversations, and that's where we were going with that is, hey, this consolidation movement, it's not new to the home inspection industry, right? Everybody's kind of treating it like that, and it really isn't. Consolidation happens in every industry all over the globe.
Hmm.
I mean, from guns to groceries, it's literally it's everything, and that's just kind of the natural progression of business. We were starting out that conversation with, here it started out with a late night commercial, right? A guy with a clipboard, a truck, and that was it. And that's how you went out. And mind you, that was one of our first reports. One of the company I worked for, it was a triplicate. What do you call that?
The carbon paper.
Yeah, the carbon copy ones,
That's
triplicate, and
awesome.
it was legal size. And some of you guys out there will remember those. That was fun times.
What, remember paper? Yeah, I remember that. It's been
Yeah,
a long time since I've seen one, but
exactly.
but so let's really dig into this. So we throw around words like commodity and we throw around words like consolidation. So basically, when something becomes a commodity, it becomes a product with no distinction from other product. So it's just a thing. So right now, home inspectors, let's go back 20 years ago. Home inspectors were you had to hire a home inspector based on his merit and his skill and how awesome he was, and then pricing was a factor. Cool. Now it's becoming a little bit more like a commodity, kind of like this person is licensed and that person is licensed, and in the mind of the buyer, they get the same thing. So from the perspective of the market, not us as the industry, but as the market that hires us, it's becoming more and more of a commodity. Consolidation is basically what you said. You know, every industry it happens in. You used to have independent grocery stores. Now you have, you know, Hannaford or Food Lion or Walmart, and they consolidated all these markets into larger stores. So a consolidating market is basically big companies kind of taking over regional or nationally. And there's a lot of that going on. I mean, nothing wrong with these companies, but well, maybe there is. I don't know. We'll talk about that. But there's a lot of companies that are growing exponentially. There's companies out there with 50, 100 or more inspectors in a company that didn't exist 20 years ago. I mean,
Right.
multi-inspector and firms were rare 20 years ago. I mean, how many multi-inspector firms were in your area, would you guess, when you first started?
Two.
Yeah, right? There wasn't even one. I live in the capital district of New York. There wasn't even one for many years. I was one of the first ones. And I was like, really? Big cities
Wow.
didn't have it? It's crazy to think about. So
That is.
why do you think it's consolidating? What's the reason?
I honestly, I think it's just the natural progression of business. And we use the words like consolidation and commoditization, and I get that. And maybe those aren't the exact perfect words for what we're talking about now. It's just for lack of a better word. But I completely 100% totally agree with you. If you can't differentiate yourself from every other home inspector, then you are every other home inspector,
Hmm.
right? So you've got to be able to differentiate yourself. I totally agree with that. But you look at this industry that started with Chuck in a truck and his brother standing in a van, right? That's what it was. And then there were a few people that hired a few people, and then you'd have a few in that word's pretty accurate. A few, right? There were a few that were multi-inspector in that they had 1 to 5 guys. Like that was a healthy company, and
Oh,
that
yeah.
still is today. Five guys or gals. That's pretty healthy. So when you get above that, now you really become distinguishable. People really start taking a look, and you and I can probably sit here and name off, just a very small number of very large companies that are in excess of 20 guys,
Yeah.
right? There's just not very many. And one of the inherent things as you grow up and you get that big, just like any other company, you get to a certain that glass ceiling where it's hard to break through. And now all of a sudden, you need more resources to buy more equipment. You need more resources to get software that can handle a larger infrastructure, right? You need more people. You need more salespeople. You need more boots on the ground. You need more of everything. And at some point, it just becomes very difficult to navigate by yourself.
So I think I see what you're saying there, that basically breaking in as a small inspection company, let's say under 5 guys or just ourselves, it makes it a lot harder to compete with bigger guys because you don't have the same infrastructure as a larger company. Is that what you're saying?
Sure. And now this larger company has somebody that can go to the meetings, the Chamber of Commerce is the real estate meetings, all those kind of things, and they put money into stuff, right? So that's a real big advantage of getting larger. Okay. And believe me, like we talked earlier, I am all about the entrepreneur. I've been self-employed more than 30 years of my life, right? I totally get it. But today, I would never ever recommend a young man or young woman coming into this industry by themselves. It's just
Really?
like society has changed, just society, right? All of a sudden, we have this unreasonable expectation of somebody, and everybody on the podcast right now just took a big, yeah, exactly, because you get blamed for the dumbest stuff, right?
Yeah, there's an unreasonable expectation of a home inspector. You know,
Yeah,
why didn't you predict my my favorite was always dishwashers break. I'd get calls 6 months, a year later, 2 years later, my
yeah,
dishwasher broke. I'm like, okay, you got to fix that.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we can complain about it, and sometimes they make for great stories, right? They make
Hmm.
some good cooler talk, but this is just where we're at. So I would never recommend somebody start off on their own. Go out, join a multi-inspector company, right? You will have time to start building your tool chest, right? Everybody's going to need moisture meters and amp meters and infrared cameras and sewer scopes and on and on and on and on. And a lot of these things get expensive. Okay. It's one thing to buy a circuit tester, less than $10. Anybody can do that, right? But now all of a sudden, if you're starting this brand new business, you have to buy all this stuff right away, and you're into thousands or tens of thousands, right? However, whatever level you're competing on. So if you join a multi-inspector company, you'll have time to build that toolbox while you're learning the trade, right? You get a paycheck, now you can go buy another tool. You get another paycheck, you can go buy another tool and start building up yourself. Plus, you learn about all the mistakes that Ian and Jon made along the way, all the stuff that you shouldn't be doing. Don't say it like this. Make sure you disclose that. You know what I'm saying? This is our SOP, this first, this second, this third, for a reason. Because if you do step 3 first, you're going to miss something in 1 or 2, right? You can start learning from the old dudes. What's the, my daughter even bought me one of those old guys rule, right? old guys rule. There's some truth to that. So it only makes sense to me, right? To not to go out on your own right away. Why don't you do this for 5 years and then make another decision? You may very well get into this, go 5 years later going, man, this marketing stuff is not me. Like, that's not my personality, not my skill set, going out, shaking hands and kissing rings. Maybe I should just stay where I'm at because this is cool. All I have to do is do my job, the stuff I love to do. Taking volts and amps and figuring things out and guiding people. Maybe that's your skill set, and there's nothing wrong with that. But trying to not only survive but thrive all by yourself is going to be tough and expensive, and your longevity isn't going to be there. One day you're going to want to go on vacation. One day you're going to get hurt. The list goes on and on and on. But this is my perspective, so it's a good conversation, right?
Yeah, so and it is a good conversation because that is an interesting perspective. I actually kind of take the opposite stance a little bit.
Okay.
So one of the questions I was going to ask you was, do you think that the consolidation of the market is a bad thing? And it sounds like maybe it's a mixed bag in your opinion. Like, there's good and there's bad to it. There's good in that, hey, you can work with a larger company and learn the trade and then go in, or learn the profession rather. And there's bad to it too. But my perspective is, I look at it like, and I've mentioned this on this podcast before, and I mentioned it to you actually one time, about like supercuts. When supercuts became big in the 80s, I remember my parents bringing us there, and they're like, you get like a $3 haircut. This is amazing. I had 3 brothers. There's 4 of us boys. That was a cheap way to get a decent haircut. For me and my brothers, we were fine with it. But there was a little boutique hair place outside the mall. It's still there. It's probably changed owners like 100 times. But it was small. It was boutique. They didn't worry about supercuts. Now a supercut haircut is, I don't know, what is it, $10 or something like that for the average guy. There's guys out there that'll go pay $50, $60, $70 for a haircut and not worry about supercuts. So if anything, supercuts just drew a line in the sand to make guys that were really good at haircuts start a boutique place. So I tend to take the opposite side of things. I wouldn't work at supercuts. But, it depends on the person. I wouldn't work at supercuts to gain experience. I'd become that boutique guys. But that's my personality. I hate working for other people. But if we're not an entrepreneur at heart, I think what you said matters a lot. Go and work for a company and say, this stinks. I want to do it on my own. Cool. Now you have that option. You're like, you know what? I like this. Now you can stick with it. Instead of starting out and finding out that you're not an entrepreneur like yourself, and saying, yeah, I'm just ditching the whole thing altogether. Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying?
Oh, 100%, totally 100%. And I love this kind of converse. When you say that consolidation can be bad, consolidation can be good, now we're talking something that's very subjective. Something that's subjective to Ian, something that's subjective to Jon, something that's subjective to every other home inspector in America. So that's whatever your personal paradigm is. Well, that's your world. Okay. For some people, if it's not for you, that's fine. There's no problem. I've got no problem with that. But let's let's talk about this so you're aware of it. Maybe there's some things that you're not aware of. For another guy, it might be a very, very good thing. Here I am at 57 years old now, and we were looking for what's our exit strategy, right? Up
Hmm.
until very recently, my exit strategy, like I knew the date, my retirement date. I could tell you it was the day before the funeral. And unfortunately, that's what the vast majority of this industry is. You're going to work until you die because when you stop, the money stops coming in. If you haven't hired people, well, yeah, the money is gone. There's nothing else there. So developing into a multi-inspector company is good on many levels. Maybe that's not for you either, and that's okay. If you want to stay a one-man, two-man band, something like that, again, there's nothing wrong with that. But for some people, the consolidation thing might be a very good thing. For us, it fit us perfect. Like we're looking for what's our exit going to be and how we're going to be able to take care of the people that we have. Because if one day we just lock the door, well, I just put a lot of family members out on the street. That's not fair. That's not cool either. Again, this is my paradigm, right? So we were looking for something that we'd be able to take care of other people, and we found something that not only could we take care of other people, but we're going to be able to offer them more than we ever could before. Like all of a sudden, I remember that after we closed and we're on our weekly company Zoom meeting and talking, and we're able to say, you know what, yo, you're going to be able to have now these benefits: the health, vision, dental, paid time off, right? Vacation time, all these things. And as part of our deal, and other deals may be different, they got some equity share. I could never, ever do that before. There's no way. The numbers wouldn't work, right? I couldn't handle that. Now all of a sudden, they've got some equity share. They own part of this. So now everybody is rowing even faster in the same direction, right? When we
Hmm.
get it, we're all going for that same goal and everybody's all excited. So for us, it's been great. And I understand you get some people with different experiences in life. Maybe it didn't work out for you, but you know what? There's a whole lot of people that it might work out really, really good for. And it's at least worth the conversation, right, Ian?
Yeah, no, and I mean, remember this is coming from a guy. I've started 3 inspection companies, multi-inspector firm. So I guess maybe part of the perceived solution and the perceived problem. But I think I guess it comes down to this. Uh, a lot of guys don't like the consolidation of the industry. Number one, because it's change, and we
Mm.
liked the Wild West. I liked the Wild West. It was
I like the
awesome.
Wild West, man.
Yeah, back in the early days, you're just driving around doing inspections, and it was the most awesome industry. There's less and less of that every year, and it's more and more consolidation and larger companies taking over. And if we don't know that, it's not that it's not happening in our area. We're probably just not looking hard enough. Because I'm not going to name the companies here, but I can name a dozen companies that have moved nationally and are consolidating our industry on the back end. We talked just a couple
Yeah.
weeks ago in a podcast. Companies even like Inspectify. I'll mention them just because it was in the news. They made a partnership with one of the MLSs, so now every home inspection that gets scheduled in that MLS, it's a national MLS, has to get scheduled through Inspectify. That is a matter of consolidation, and also part of the commoditization of the home inspection service as a whole. And I say that because let's talk about the subjectiveness of this. Maybe we're thinking as we're listening, you're listening into Jon and I right now, and you're thinking, I'm not bothered by this. I'm going to be one of the big companies, or I'm not bothered by this. I'm driving around my truck for the big companies, or whatever we're thinking. Let's talk about how this has happened in other industries that are actually close to ours. Appraisers, pest control.
Pest control is a
Um,
huge one, right?
oh yeah, even some of the service industry. There used to be a lot of small companies that were HVAC contractors. Now, for the most part, they're taken over by very large or moderately large companies nationally. So, tell me, Jon, what's your opinion of? Let's take one. It seems like you, from our previous conversation, had a somewhat of a knowledge of the pest control industry. How did that consolidate, and what was your opinion on what were the good aspects and bad aspects of that?
Yeah, well, that's just a really good example. It's a because it's a very parallel to what we're doing right now. And a matter of fact, a lot of home inspectors are pest control guys
Hmm.
and WDO or WDI guys, whatever they're called in your area, right? So people really get that, and it's been happening for decades, where some mom and pop will build something up and they get a route, right? And they start accumulating this stuff, and they also start realizing that, man, this is hard work, and it was okay when we had 20 people on our route, or we were working with 5 or 10 home inspectors, and now it's grown and it's getting out of hand. But they've got something of value, and then you have somebody like a Terminex, say, come in, and they can bring a lot of stuff to the table. They're going
Yeah,
to take care of their clients, right? You might get a nice big check. Mom and pop might get a nice big check when they leave. They might have an earnout. They might have some equity share, depending on what type of platform is going on. There's some real good advantages to that, and we see that like constantly. And am I allowed to mention company names here?
yeah, you can as
um,
long as it's in a respectful way. Yeah,
Very respectful. I mean, look at for goodness sake, the largest consolidator in this entire industry is Natchez,
hmm.
right? I mean, look at all the stuff that they're doing. Like they offer a ton of stuff. I couldn't even recall it all. They do so many things. So, maybe you weren't necessarily thinking like that, and maybe what Nick is doing is a little bit different than what we're talking about. I get all of that. The whole thing is this consolidation type of movement has always been here, and it's here, and it's bigger business has their eye on this industry. For so long we were so fragmented, and oh heck, by the post you saw that I did, um, awful segmented as well. Boy, there's some
Yeah,
people that believe it this way, people that believe it that way. uh, I mentioned to you, I on the side that nobody could see, I had some great conversations, one-on-one conversations, that people go, thanks for posting. I heard about some of the stuff going on. I'm unaware of it. Whether they were newer to the business or older to the business, some of them were actually looking for the same thing that we're looking for, a way out. And we had some really great conversations on the side. And it's just talking. What is good for me might not be good for those people. And for some, it was. And it was all my point was just is let's have the conversation, right? This what has happened is some private equity company has come in and built a platform, and now this platform is actually helping a lot of brands, a lot of different brands being pulled into the fold, maintaining their brand, okay, but being able to use synergies to make everybody more profitable. Synergies, I mean, instead of having the same uh, marketing budget or HR budget in this company and this company, now there's one, right? Now you have, uh, in other words, using synergies like one, and everybody's profit margin goes up, okay, while still maintaining brands, but you have efficiencies and and there's, man, leadership. When you get into private equity kind of stuff, and I don't mean that I'm not the VC private equity guru, anything like that. But what little that I do know, and I'm letting you know I do know a little. That's it. There's very, very smart people that on the very top of this that crunch numbers, and that is not me. I am not a numbers guy. My wife, on the other hand, she can pull them out of her head. She knows. She knows. So we work together very, very well. But there's some very, very, very smart guys that crunch numbers, that figure out, they understand how business works,
hmm,
right? And they can put systems in place, and they have investors that pool together some money. And then you start to pull in all this talent, and you start really creating something really good. You're creating a platform in order to move towards your goals faster than you ever could before. I mean, this is really exciting stuff. Like all the people, the partners and stuff that I'm working with now, I know these people and I know what they're capable of. Way more than John and Bobby Lynn were ever capable of. I tell you that.
yeah. So I guess how I would sum up my opinion about it is It's kind of like steering a boat and you see this wave coming. You can't pretend it's not coming. You either steer into it or steer with it. So, what
Point.
decision we make is not necessarily good or bad. The wave is not necessarily good or bad either. It's just there. So,
Mm.
what do we choose to do about it? I think about the pest control industry, and I think you're talking a lot about resources that companies can bring in. It's pretty interesting how we talked about process mapping with Greg Brooks a few weeks back, maybe a couple months ago now. And it surprises me how much process mapping you can do in almost any industry. And there's professional process mappers. I actually know somebody who is. He would go into places and skilled tradesmen, and he would say, you're a skilled tradesman. No one can teach that level of skill. You have to live it. But let me videotape everything that you do. And he would videotape everything that they do, and he would process map the entire thing. Now he could get people with way less skill to take 60 to 70% of his workload off, and then people with higher skill to focus on the rest of that.
Great example.
And so now they were running more efficiently. It actually created jobs and created production, and it's process mapping. Now, home inspectors hate it when I say this, but home inspection business in general, there's always going to be one home inspector more skilled than the other.
Mm.
I've always considered myself a very skilled home inspector, but I had agents that process mapped me without knowing it. They'd be like, Ian's going to go here, 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 and here. And they would actually walk around and they'd pre-find stuff for me before I ever got to the inspection.
Cool.
Did they find everything I found? No.
Of course not.
But did they get pretty darn close from being on hundreds of inspections with me? Yeah, like eerily. Process mapping. What do you do when you show up? What do you do in this? What do you do? What do you write when you have this issue? What do you say on the phone here? What do you do there? It can all be process mapped. The sad part about that is almost anything can be process mapped. Like the skilled welder 50 years ago is now replaced by a machine. Masons are being replaced by AI right now with these. If you watch it on Facebook, those machines that will actually do part of the pour for you. Obviously, that's a long way off and an extreme example, but
But I've
you
seen
can.
drones that can nail shingles to roofs.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. There's all kinds of technology advancement.
but that comes from process mapping. So if somebody can get 80% of what you do and then stick two people on site for cheaper than you can do it, it it goes back to my point about consolidation and inspections becoming a commodity being kind of the same subject, because now it's somebody goes and says, I want to hire a home inspector, and your agent says, here, call this company, they have 30 of them. It's kind of like when I call a pest control company, not that I ever do, but you call a pest control company, you don't get to pick your technician. You get the guy that comes out and he says, I killed the mice and I treated for the termites, and he goes away. If you have a problem, another technician comes out. It's not like you have this personal connection with your pest control technician. There are those kind of companies out there, but they're
Mhm.
becoming rarer and rarer and being taken over by these larger companies. So there's good and there's bad. They come with more tools, more resources, and a process map. So they're very consistent and they have a lot of resources, like you said. But there's still that 20% lingering around where the skilled home inspector had that you really can't replace. That can't be process mapped. That comes from 40 years of building homes. That comes from 30 years of plumbing. That comes from doing home inspections for 25 years, like yourself. That can't be taught. So that also leads to home inspections becoming a commodity. But as soon as it becomes a commodity, that's when the consolidation really just overwhelms, so to speak.
Yeah, but to your point, society, there's a certain level of expectation in society now, right?
Mm-hmm.
They want it faster, cheaper, more options.
McDonald's.
McDonald's, there you go. Bam, bam, bam. So efficiencies are obviously there. We can come up with a million different examples, and that was my whole point. Is just to let's talk about this. It's just because you think it's bad isn't bad for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
right? So let's and we've had good conversation, and we've had some heated conversation. Well, I didn't have any of the heated conversations. I think that was all via the keyboard. But
Oh, with me? Was I heated? Sorry, I love this stuff. I could talk about it all day.
no, on some of these social media platforms,
Oh,
sometimes you just got to keep your mouth shut and let people do what they're going to do, right? Because it just is what it is.
well, yeah, and it's important to think about that because we're a rare industry right now still, where we are still made up a large portion of independent solo inspectors, where you can still get into the industry for a minimal amount. You want to
Hmm.
become a carpenter, dude, that's you're going to spend some money. You want to become
Right.
a roofer, you want to become almost any, I mean, even if you want to clean carpets or windows, you're still going to have to invest in tools and equipment. You can still get into home inspections and make a good living on minimal money, but the
Yes,
time
sir.
for that is limited. So let me ask you, so you're on that boat and you're watching the wave. My thought on it is I'm not going to push against the wave. I'm not going to push against it. I'm not going to ride with it. I'm going to kind of go to the side and be boutique. That's my MO.
Nothing wrong with that.
What's your perception of that? I think you kind of alluded to it. Are you gonna ride with the wave and say let's ride this out, or are you gonna push against it?
Oh, that's a good. I'm glad you brought it up. And whatever is good for Ian might not be good for Susan.
Who's Susan?
Might not be good for Mark. Might not be good for John. So I think the best approach is listen.
Hmm.
Use your ears, talk, uh, become members of your local chapters, become members in your chambers. Do this, find out what's happening, what's going on, and take what you think is good for you, and you do you. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to stay, we got a local guy here that has been in big business before, very big business, and he will have nothing to do with that ever again. He's about my age, so he's up there, and his paradigm is just a little different. You should having a conversation with him is way different than any other single operator I've ever had in my life. He knows his numbers like big time. He understands all of those things and his inefficiencies and his efficiencies. He's got it all down, but he's very comfortable in that scenario. And God bless him. More power to him. Vince is a good dude if he's listening to this.
Hi,
Um,
Vince.
now I'm going to tell him he's going to have to listen to this and stay to the very end to hear that. But it really depends on what your goals are. There are some people that are ready just to leave the industry. Maybe there's other opportunity, and the consolidation thing is really appealing to somebody like that. If you're young and full of it and ready to go set the world on fire, maybe it's not the right thing for you at the right time. But one day, you know what, it might be. So why not take this opportunity to build some relationships? And who knows, you may be calling, going, "Hey, can we start that conversation back up again? Some things have changed in my life, personal or professional, or what. You never know. So don't. I would tell anybody and everybody here, don't hate. Just listen and keep the information with you because you might need it one day.
I'm actually processing over in my mind some things you were talking about earlier, and I do kind of see one of your points a little bit clearer now, and I think I agree with it. That one of the good things about the yeah, thumbs up, right? You like it when Ian agrees with John. Um, it does create a unique opportunity, and I often talk about when I started in the industry, there were no resources for me. Now she was around; it wasn't as big as it is now, but it wasn't like I could go and ask people questions and learn how to do an inspection from somebody, and everybody was one man shows, close knit, didn't want to talk with you, especially if you were new and young. Now, when you start out, you have all these multi inspector firms to choose from. You can learn the trade, take your time, decide what you want to do, and it does create an opportunity. It doesn't destroy the opportunity to be a one man show and to be, to live in the Wild West and be a cowboy. But the railroad coming through, modernizing things changes things, but it also creates opportunity for us. So I do kind of agree with that part of things. It does create opportunity. Pest control operator, go back to that analogy. Yeah, now you can go work for a company, learn the whole trade, build up your tools, and now when you start, you hit the ground running. So yeah, I guess I do see your point there, and I do agree with that. That's a good part. I'm not saying all things are good or bad with the whole wave coming at our ship. It's just a matter of what, like you said, what are we going to do with it? You can't make it stop. It's coming.
It's coming. So let's deal with it. And how each person deals with it may differ, but at least we can all work together. And if we work together, we can come up with something that's amicable for everybody. And
Yeah.
if there was more of that, we would be much less fragmented and stratified. If that's not the right word, but it's the only thing I can think of now, right?
Yeah. I go back to that hair thing, the illustration I was talking about. I have friends that are one-man shows and they're hairdressers. They don't worry about the big beauty shops. So there's room for both. There's room for a consolidated market, one-man shows, smaller
100%.
companies of 5 and under, and the 50 to 150 home inspector firms. A little bit harder to compete with them, but yeah, there's room for everybody. And I think consolidation is good and bad to it. So,
Amen.
and, and,
Amen.
and you changed my mind on a thought. That's hard to do, John. I got to say, I'm pretty belligerent. There you go. Anything else you'd like to tell us about your thoughts on the consolidation of the industry? Because again, you have a unique perspective. You've been around for a long time. Any final thoughts that you'd like to give inspectors out there?
Keep an open mind. And again, if anybody wants to talk to me about it, I'm happy to talk about it. Not a problem. I'm not going to persuade you one way or the other because I don't have that kind of right. Right? Whatever your core belief system is, whatever your goals are, that's you. And if I can help you be you better, then by all means, I'm not going to tell you one way or the other, but I'm happy to have the conversation. And I've for several people, I've moved that conversation on up to higher levels, and that was very, very good for them.
Nice. John, I can't tell you thank you enough for being on the show today. This was a great conversation. As I mentioned, I talk about this subject a lot. And I think it's important that we as an industry and individual home inspectors give it a lot of thought. What are we going to do as this wave hits? Make our decisions now. Don't just ignore it. So thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, dude, thank you. Really appreciate it, Ian.
Yep. Talk soon.
All right, buddy.